the opposition to this ballot is not just business groups, although we have many business groups on our side. There's 8 professional nursing organizations representing Massachusetts nurses opposed to this, more than 60 physician, community health center, home health agency, and other behavioral health groups that are opposed to this, and every single hospital in the state is opposed to this. It's likely that for behavioral health, where we are seeing a very significant opioid epidemic right now, would have to close nearly 1,000 of 3,000 plus beds if this passes. There's a huge shortage of nurses, especially in psychiatry. This would be just devastating. We graduate about 3,500 nurses a year, but about 4,500 are retiring or leaving the field to take care of family. So there just aren't enough to replace them. Without ratios, ratios would add another 4,700 nurses that we would need on top of that, and we currently have 1,200 vacancies in the hospital.
Thank you very much. That was perfect. As soon as he gave me the signal, you were done. Okay, so now we're going to open it up to Q&A. I'm sorry, Q&A. When I give you a signal, you can start as soon as I hear if there's a question. Does anybody have a question for either of these two speakers? Yes? State your name and where you live.
Irene Ewell, I live here in North Reading. So my concern, I guess, about the increased costs, I think, you know, the yeses will say it's not that high, the noes will say it's much higher, and I think we understand that. But it will definitely increase. My concern, I think, is mostly with the neighborhood hospitals, the ones that are out in, you know, what you were calling me, one of them was like Hayward Hospital, the community hospitals around. So their budget is already pretty skimpy, I think, right? And if you add on this expensive talent, my fear is that they're not going to be able to sustain those increased costs. And rather than go under, they're going to try to not do that first. But if they have to, then there'll be the big conglomerates of Partners Healthcare, Tufts, BMC, Beth Israel. They will, you know, probably easily want to gobble these guys up. The other, so that's one concern. So maybe one of you could speak to that. The other is the community hospitals. Sometimes, like, how would services affect it? For instance, some people don't want to always go into Boston for, let's say, dialysis. So we can't, you know, Lawrence Memorial, let's say, we can't provide those services anymore because it's too expensive. We have to cut back. We can't cut back on staff, but we have to cut back on services. So to what degree could that happen? Because now people can't go to their community hospital. They have to now go into a larger city.
I assume your question is to both?
To either who wants
Okay.
to.
Would you like to go first?
On the community hospital question, you know, because I live in a community, my community hospital I can walk to. But unfortunately in Massachusetts now, pretty much every hospital is part of a system. And all these systems are very profitable. So, for instance, you know, Hayward's still hooked up with Health Alliance into UMass. So they are profitable entities. If you look at, like, I live in Winchester, I can walk to the hospital. Winchester made $142 million over the last 5 years, now going to be part of Leahy, which is also making money. So I think that in Massachusetts, the hospitals have enough money to both meet the question 1 demands, but obviously still be operational. We would not be putting forth this question if we thought it was going to cause closures of hospitals. We've always fought against the closure of hospitals. We also fight against the closure of services. So I do believe Massachusetts is in a good position to both fund this and still be able to operate the hospitals that are there.
So the Center for Health Information and Analysis is another independent state agency. Feel free to Google them, CHIA, that's what we call it. They actually do reports on hospital finances every single year, and actually I think that they put out mid-year indicators as well. So if you look at the reports from CHIA, this is all publicly available data, anybody can access it. The hospitals, the M&A is putting out this big number, $28.5 billion industry. That's the revenue that they took in, I believe, for 2016 or 2017. What they don't say is that expenses were $28 billion, which means you have $500 million left over after all of that. More than 80% of hospitals in the state are nonprofit hospitals, even Partners is nonprofit. That money goes back into investments in staffing, facilities, resources, and community benefits. Another story that's not told enough is that hospitals provide hundreds of millions of dollars in community benefits. That's uncompensated care for patients that can't afford to pay for it, cancer screenings, behavioral health, opioid or addiction services. Hospitals last year provided $600 million in community benefits. This is all money and benefits, services, programs that we are very, very scared will be cut significantly to pay for it. The $28 billion is not distributed equally among all of the hospitals. Yes, some hospitals are in systems. Haywood is not part of a system. But there's a lot of community hospitals. I want to say close to 14. They're already operating in the red. Right now, they're already in negative margins. This ballot would more than double the number of hospitals that go into the red.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question? State your name and what town you live.
How you doing? I'm Rex Whitmore. I live in North Reading. I have one question and one question only. How will this make Massachusetts hospitals better? I already know that a lot of people come to Massachusetts to get health care because we are already renowned for having great health care. So how is this going to improve it?
Okay. So you went first last time, you can go first this time.
That's an excellent question. Excellent question. It won't. If anything, it'll make it worse because of decreased access to care. Massachusetts is a leader in quality among almost all quality indicators. We have the lowest mortality, in-hospital mortality rate in the country per the Commonwealth Fund, again, publicly available data. We also score very well on infections, low rates of hospital infections, patient safety indicators. We have very high patient satisfaction. And just to compare back to California, again, the only state in the country that has mandated staffing ratios. So for example, the Commonwealth Fund, they rank Massachusetts number 2 for healthcare. California's ranked 14. The Agency for Health Research and Quality, which is another government agency, they also have state rankings publicly available. Massachusetts is ranked 4th. California is ranked 42nd. Leapfrog safety scores for hospitals, also publicly available data. That's measuring all hospitals on a grade of A to F. Massachusetts has no hospitals that have a D or an F grade. California has many, and taken as a whole across the state, Massachusetts is ranked 4th. California is ranked 25th for hospital safety. So if mandated ratios are truly the answer to improving quality, why is California at the middle or the bottom and Massachusetts is at the top?
We do have very good healthcare here, but there are certain things that we're not very good at. I mentioned earlier, we are last in readmissions. So that means something's getting missed. If you're in the hospital and then you are discharged and have to come back, then something went wrong. And hospitals are penalized for that. So I think a couple things. One, the hospital will be better off as the readmission rate goes down. They won't be penalized by CMS. Also, it'll probably save about $80 million per year. So. And the last thing I would just say is the Leapfrog that she cited, Leapfrog is a pay-to-play. You have to pay to have them review you, so I don't think that's particularly relevant.
Is there, You can respond to her, you can respond to her if she,
I didn't respond the first time because I thought we were just going to go question by question.
okay.
I'll do that.
Okay. I have 2 minutes to go. Does anybody have another question? Ah, there you go. Name and town you live.
I'm Eli Spicer and I live here in North Reading. So my question is more of a general one as to why you're deliberately misrepresenting data. Sure, they do say it could cost 950 million, but that's on their high end. That's their non-conservative estimate. Their conservative estimate was 676 million. So you said that their 950 million was their conservative, but it's not.
Can I definitely address that? I'm just gonna run to my table real quick.
Can I just do a quick thing?
Yeah,
Well,
you can respond, that's fine.
Okay.
Just quickly, she can defend herself, but just quickly in the cost estimate, I will say, the HPC number basically was about, for every FTE that would need to be added, they came up with a figure that cost about 300,000 per FTE. I think that's wildly high. If you look in the red book that you received from the Secretary of State, if you look at the cost to the Commonwealth, because it covers some state hospitals, their cost estimate is about 140,000 per FTE, which again, I think might be a little high, but is much more than the range. HPC, 300,000, seems wildly erroneous to me.
That's a great question. I have the HPC report right here, also publicly available. I encourage everyone to go look it up. So what they did was they had, it wasn't one conservative estimate and one non-conservative estimate. What they did was they had two different models. The whole thing was stated as a conservative estimate. Hold on, I'm just trying to find the right page. And it's also not estimating $300,000 per nurse either. So this is a sheet. I'm happy to show this to anybody if they want after the meeting. And again, it's also publicly available on the mass.gov website. They did two different analyses where they estimated wage increases separately. So they estimated, I believe, a 4% wage increase for nurses in one model, 4% or 6% in the second model. And then there was also, they explain all of the different details. But so they came out, you're right, 676 million to 949 million. And the text at the bottom here says the estimated costs are likely to be conservative as they do not include any costs related to implementation in emergency departments, observation units, and outpatient departments, as well as other one-time costs. See next slide for additional information. So I believe that's exactly what I said when I was representing it. And here it says the ongoing costs do not include emergency departments, observation units, outpatient departments, increased RN staffing costs to non-acute hospitals, state agency implementation costs, and penalties for non-compliance. And other costs not included are the one-time acuity tool costs that they estimate to be almost $60 million. And turnover costs for RNs who might be moving from one facility to another should this pass. The cost breakdown here, the total for RNs, it's not just the per RN total. It's the acuity tool, it's the wage inflation, it's the state hospitals. So there's a lot more costs here than just how many nurses that they need. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. And that brings to a close question number 1. I thank you both very much. As I said earlier, everything's to be informative. It doesn't end here. You still have to go home and do some homework because there's always something new and something different that you have to pay attention to. We're going to move on to question 2, and by the way, I didn't mention this before, but our timer is right here, and he will give you a 2-minute, I'm sorry, question number 1, I didn't say this. But he will give you a 2-minute warning and a 1-minute warning, and then if you're still talking, I just jump on the stage and grab the mic. So, so question 2. To create a citizens commission to recommend potential amendments to the U.S. Constitution to establish that corporations do not have the same constitutional rights as human beings. The yes speaker is Leo Imonem for WeThePeople.org. Leo is a lifelong resident of Massachusetts who has served on the Rentham Zoning Board of Appeals and is the current chair of the Conservation Commission. For the past 4 years, Leo has been volunteering with the We the People of Massachusetts group. They believe that we need to amend the U.S. Constitution as described in question 2. So Leo, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. As you mentioned, I'm a volunteer with We the People Massachusetts, and we're working towards amending the Constitution again, Amendment number 28. And we support question 2 because it has 2 planks that we feel are important. 1, the rights protected by the Constitution are the rights of human individuals only. And 2, the spending of money to influence elections is not protected free speech under the First Amendment, and therefore Congress and the states shall regulate it. So the question is, why is this amendment needed? We now have unlimited, unaccountable, independent expenditures streaming into our political campaigns. This is undermining the Republican and Democratic parties. Historically, our parties have identified, supported, and developed candidates who represent the core beliefs of the members of those parties. Recently, we are finding elected, well-funded candidates are responsible to their donors and not the party. We are losing our ability as citizens to govern ourselves to the wealthy elite of our society, and I find this deeply disturbing. So how did we get to this point? In the late 1960s and early 70s, our government legislated actively on behalf of the people. Our government passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. They created the Environmental Protection Agency. These environmental laws and other labor and consumer protection laws caused big business to feel as if they were under attack. As a reaction to this, the United States Chamber of Commerce asked corporate lawyer and tobacco company director Lewis Powell to write down how big business could respond. His paper laid out a multi-pronged plan to get back more power for big business over our government. As a result, for the past half-century, we have been subjected to a massively funded campaign by national and global corporations and the right-wing billionaires that they created to take control of our democracy. Furthermore, to prepare the legal basis for court battles, new legal foundations were created and funded. Attorney Jeff Clements, author of the book Corporations Are Not People, and the drafter of Question 2, commented on these foundations by stating, "These legal foundations were intended to drive into every court in the land the concept that corporations are persons with constitutional rights against which the laws of the people must fall." End quote. Thus began a whole series of court decisions that declared that corporations to be persons and gave them protections under the Constitution